who are all set for some more enlightenment in the Kelvin Hall. So we've got. All right. I have to be behind the desk. Sorry. Okay. All right. I'll make all my jokes again. Sorry. So. Just that. All right. Okay there? Yep. Thank you. I just need it when I'm introducing everyone. Thank you. So yeah, welcome back after lunch and the final session of papers in the conference. And we have 3 presentations this afternoon, as unfortunately Anthony Lilly was unable to attend. So conveniently, his was the last slotted paper, so we'll just move up the closing roundtable discussion a little bit. So we've got 3 presentations. Our first one is Christina Kamposiori, who did her PhD at University College London, working with Simon Mahony and Claire Warwick, who is now at the University of Durham. And Christina is now working at the Research Libraries UK organisation as a programme officer. So I'll hand over to you. There you go.
So thank you very much, Lorna, for the introduction, and thank you, Maria and Rosie, for having me here today. So my presentation today, user requirements for evaluating digital resources, the case of art history, will be based on part of my PhD thesis results. So I will look at how at art historians' behavior when accessing resources, as well as the needs they have. So just to start. Okay, but first of all, I would like to give you just some contextual information regarding my the background of my research and how I got interested in this topic, as well as in the field more generally. So my PhD thesis is looking on how art historians build their personal collections of information, and how they use them in the context of research and teaching. So while doing my master thesis and looking at the informational and methodological behavior of art historians, I realized that there was a strong, that personal collections played a really important role in their research, but also that was a major part of the literature was focusing on how art historians looked for information and how they accessed information, but there were very few information on what they actually did with the data they gathered afterwards. And also there was a lot of outdated literature, mainly highlighting the hesitant stance that art historians had towards new technologies. And given the development of the field, as well as the different technological innovations nowadays, I thought that it was really important to just conduct further research and to confirm whether these previous studies results were still valid. So, but generally speaking, my interest in user studies mainly derives from my belief that understanding scholarly practices is key for developing digital tools and services that really meet the needs of scholars. Okay, coming back to the personal collections, as I said before, a major part of the literature just demonstrated that they had a really important role in the scholarly workflow in art history. So scholars used them both for research and teaching, and sometimes they felt the need of creating big personal collections because of problems they faced when accessing resources, and some other related problems. There are copyright issues which very often art historians have to deal with. And lastly, the personal collections, of course, offer the benefit of organizing them and managing them based on personal criteria, so they are easy for them to use. So just to say a few things about my methodological approach. So I conducted 20 semi-structured, in-depth interviews with art historians. These were both face-to-face and online interviews. And also the art historians that participated in my research came from various career stages, and they looked at different topics. However, I had my sampling approach was to gather two different groups of scholars, the one conducting, as I called it, non-traditional research, and the other one traditional. So what do I mean by that? So non-traditional research, I define non-traditional research when scholars used methodologies that were considered non-traditional, maybe digital methodologies, or followed a quantitative approach to art history. And traditional research, the traditional researchers were either looking at the more traditional subjects like European art, or employing more traditional methodologies in art history. And also I forgot to mention that apart from the methodologies and the non-traditional aspect, I was looking on scholars studying topics that were considered, again, non-traditional based on previous studies in the field. And this was like Asian art, because previous researchers showed that the needs of these groups of scholars were understudied. And also, apart from the interviews, I employed observation of their personal collections, both physical and digital collections. The observation process just were a complementary method to the interviews, like meaning triggering conversation and triggering scholars' memory around the practices when building their personal collections. So generally, I asked them to either send me, when the interviews were conducted online, I asked scholars to send me photographs of parts of their collections they considered important. And when the interviews were conducted face-to-face, I went there myself and took photographs of their personal collections, both in digital form and in physical, of course, when I had the consent of the participants. So the main themes are the questions of the interviews. The main question on which the interview questions were based were the first more information gathering, and in that case I was interested in finding out how scholars first accessed information, and what types of resources resources they visited, as well as what types of information objects they gathered, in order to get an idea of the consistency of their personal collections. And then we moved to the information organization and management part, and information use, as well as information used both in the context of research and teaching, as well as the role of the personal collections in general in their work. So for the purposes of this presentation, I will focus mostly on the first part, on the information access and gathering. So regarding the information objects that scholars were found to use, our results confirmed previous studies, both in art history and more generally in the arts and humanities. So they still tend to use a lot of primary, secondary material, different formats and different types of information objects. The art objects is still a very important resource. So sometimes when resources, especially primary resources, are scattered all over the world, scholars still face the need to travel around in order to gather the necessary information. But in our study, we found that there were that scholars tended to increasingly use new types of information objects, like digital born data, and of course this raised various challenges of them. And we believe that there is a need for further research in that. So generally speaking about the information discovery aspect and the access issues, again, they still faced problems with regards to access to digital resources and information. Because one of the reasons was that material is still not digitized, especially when it comes to primary resources, or is sometimes difficult to access. There are copyright problems or cost in order to gain the images, especially when scholars when they need it. Then, although there are some differences depending on the areas of research, so some subject areas face greater difficulties than others, like when there was limited resource availability, especially in areas like modern art, digital art, and generally non-European art. Okay, so moving now to the more to how they look, to a bit more information about how they looked for information. So scholars usually started online, and they sometimes, especially when they didn't know where to look, when they didn't have something in mind, just Googled to see what comes up in their area of study. So it didn't mean that they would visit necessarily a specific digital resources. Browsing, training, and asking, like following references or asking colleagues for information when they didn't know where to go to find them, were some of the popular practices. And this confirms again trends in behavior in the general area of arts and humanities, not only in art history. However, we found that also social media networks have started to being used like as resources to find information, something that previous studies have not mentioned. And this, of course, is again generates questions as to whether they cite and many issues that whether they cite these resources and many of the other issues that Maribel also discussed in her presentation earlier. Now, one of the things that I wanted to examine when asking them about this, about how they went about finding and gathering information, was how do they decide which resources to choose or which resources to trust. So they generally tended to go to places, digital or physical, that they trusted, and this meant that they found them reliable based either on previous experience or on the resource type, like whether it was considered to be academic, like Chester, because sometimes they were trained, their training included the use of this kind of resource, so they felt that they trusted them. Their institution, whether if a resource was provided by an institution they trusted, they would use it. They would use the information. Also, the author, depending on the author or publisher, and of course based on the recommendations of their colleagues. But this, of course, were generally in the cases where they kind of knew where to go. If they didn't know exactly where to go, they just relied on Google, and then when they find generally a resource, they go about applying some of these criteria. Some more criteria were related to convenience, but convenience in terms of accessibility and availability, like language. In some cases where scholars were conducting highly interdisciplinary research, language was often a problem. So if they do not know the language, they either just chose a different resource, or sometimes language could pose problems in terms of information seeking. If they had first to learn the language, then the information seeking process could be postponed for later in their research. And then the availability based on topic, and the relevance, of course, of the information provided through a specific resource, the relevance to topic or the object of study, and the quality and breadth of material, and the design of a resource which was an interesting finding, and the design of the resource when I say the redesign of a resource, I mean in terms of usability, of the visual characteristics and the flexibility. And I mean the visual characteristics because they are quite linked to memory. Scholars talked about having like the specific visual characteristics of specific resource, they kind of with triggering their memory, and they found it really useful when using them. So this is a kind of characteristic of art historical discipline, which we believe it's really interesting. So this is a quote from one of my participants, and when they were talking about digital resources, and generally speaking, scholars in my study have started to getting aware of the impact that the digitization projects can have on their research. So they talked about the apparent interpretative choices that sometimes have been made to the content of a resource, and these choices were not always clear to them. So if they believed that the design of a resource was not good enough for their purposes, they probably choose to go to visit the resource, if it's a library, for example, physically, rather than continue using the digital resource. So this is one of what one of our participants said, that they need more digital resource to be more intuitive and just follow the practices of art historians. So this is one of the my results regarding what actually art historians did after they found the information and they decided that they want to use them. So for identifying the different patterns of art historians' behavior, we used different information behavior models. This one is principally based on Kuhlthau's information search model, which has different stages, which are the initiation, selection, exploration, formulation, collection, and presentation. And we generally looked for information-seeking models that they contain the stage of collection. And so when applying this model to what we found through the interviews and observation, we discovered that there are at least two different phases of gathering with different characteristics in the behavior of art historians. So the first one takes place very early on in the research process, and its purpose is generally to investigate and explore the topic, while the second one, which we called focused gathering, again based on the terminology used in Kuhlthau's model as well, is the purpose of the second one is to build and enhance the research argument, and it generally takes place after an initial organization of the material collected in the first stage, as well as when the scholars have developed a better understanding of their topic, which happens sometimes during writing. So the interesting aspect in the behavior of art historians is while Kuhlthau generally includes the gathering phase in the second phase, in the focused gathering, art historians started to gather really early in the research process this information, and this is because due to reasons of access. So sometimes they just when they find something that they consider relevant, they just feel that they have to gather it, so they gather as much as possible at a very early stage. And our conclusion on that is that the art historians can have different information needs at different stages of their research, and that means that this should be taken into account when creating digital resources, because the use of a digital resource differs based on the stage of the research process. So just before I finish, just some general other wishes they had with regards to digital resources. Some of them wished for hubs containing all necessary information in specific areas of study, like modern art. They wanted the digitization process to be more transparent, and this can be achieved through taking into consideration the users' views early on in the digitization process. And they wish for good quality and open access resources, as well as for tools for working with the information, especially with digital important data, which are hard to capture and manage. And just to conclude, so I still believe that there is a limited understanding in terms of the behavior of scholars in specific areas of study, and we also need to know more about how what the scholars do after they discover the information they want, and to just offer access to useful digital resources, because having access doesn't necessarily mean that the resources is useful for them. So that's it. Thank you for listening.